Welcome to the Strategy Skills podcast. I'm your host, Chris Safarova. And today we have a very special guest, Marcy Syms. Marcy was the youngest female president of an NYSE listed company and led Syms Corp, a 16-state retail chain. And she oversees a 60 million grant foundation and serves on the boards of NPR and Harvard's Women's Politics and Policy program. And those are just some of the amazing achievements. Marcy, it's such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this.
So let's start with your early days. What first drew you into the world of retail? I know it's a family business, but what were some of your initial thoughts as you were starting your career?
I never wanted to go into retail. My father started working in retail when he was young, and he became a salesperson in his father and older brother's store. He didn't go into his own business and opened his own store until I was 9 years old, 10 years old about. And all I knew was we never saw him. He was always working. So to me, retail was about almost like servitude. There was nothing servant leader about it. It was just servitude. And I pursued my own career in broadcasting and was very, very pleased to land what I considered to be my ideal job in broadcasting as assistant to a president and a radio producer. And I did that really up until the time that my father's asking me several times to join him in the business. I finally saw that his business not only inspired me, but the scalability of the business was really inspiring and exciting. And I also felt that at that point in my career, I had something to bring to the family business. We were a family business at that point. When I joined the company, there were 4 stores. We had about 5 years after I joined the company, we had 11 stores and took the company public. But it was really the joy of having my name on the door. It was the joy of being able to be an entrepreneur and pursue anything that I felt the business needed. Going to FIT to learn textiles, or going to NYU for a real estate program, or getting involved with local philanthropies to help the public relations of a store. Whatever it was, the opportunity as an entrepreneur was just, I couldn't leave it. It got me into, as soon as I was there with my dad for a store opening and contributed to that, I was hooked.
Do you remember your first day?
Yeah. The first day, I guess, not just the first day of joining my dad, because that was kind of telling that when I did, I only joined for a 3-month trial period. I asked him if we could do something where I would be a consultant for the media and marketing campaign for the opening of a store in a new market. We were opening in Washington, D.C., outside of the New York, New Jersey area, where the company had been in operation for 18 years. And the agreement was that I would be in charge of creating this media campaign to introduce Syms to the Washington, D.C. market. That being said, my father had already done advertising in the New York market. So I was very much bringing an expertise, but at the same time, anxiously learning what he knew about media and media planning, and his brilliant messaging. An educated consumer is our best customer. And that was something I felt so akin to. It was something that he did in 1974, really tapping into this whole idea of it was no longer consumer beware. It was you as a business You are responsible also for educating your consumers, not for trying to get something over on them and just getting the money, but teach them something. If you teach your consumers something, they will feel more loyal to you. And so the first day was a lot of learning.
Educated consumer is our best consumer. Can you tell us more? What does that actually mean?
It means that in our case, the more we explained what a customer was looking at in the store, the more they'd realize what an incredible value they were getting. For example, when we were selling a name brand shirt or sport coat or women's suit or dresses, whatever, you could go to a department store at that time and see what it was actually selling for. And then you could come back to Syms and oftentimes see the same thing, and it would be at least half the price. We were selling at off price, which was new. Off price, as Syms executed that idea, was a disruptor. We were disrupting the supply chain to consumers. We were saying to the vendor, we will take your overproduction, we will take your end of season, and we are going to find a price where we're going to be able to sell it. We're going to pay you in 30 days, whether we sell it or not. In that time, they call it the rubber band agreement. A lot of vendors were making goods for department stores that they would get back at the end of the season if it didn't sell. So the vendor was stuck with goods and couldn't turn those goods into cash. That was really one of the ingenious ways in which Syms got into business. So if consumers knew what prices were and understood the value of the name brand they were looking at, they were educated enough to not let that bargain go by. They were going to buy it. We also had a saying, the more you know about clothing, the better it is for Syms. And today we can think of other name brands, regardless of whether it's in technology or home goods or whatever it is. You look at that item, you see a brand name, you see the manufacturer, you bring expectations to your purchase about how good the performance is going to be, how you can trust their certification of reliability. You bring that name, that brand name stands for something, and it creates loyalty. So we were standing with the vendor to create this education of the consumer.
Marcy, and when you started in the business and you started being involved in making sure that you select the right items, because you still had to pay the vendor, whether you sell it or not, was that stressful? How did you approach it?
It was always stressful because we did not profess to be fashion forward or fashion leaders in the industry. Remember, we were getting things at the end of the season or things that had not sold. So we knew that it was always on the buy. For example, off-price meant that we were buying below wholesale. So if a department store sold something for $100, they paid $50 for it. We would never pay $50. We would buy that same $50 wholesale for perhaps $30 and then still take a shorter markup for the consumer. The guideline for our purchasing was within 10% of the wholesale price. So you can imagine the difference in the number between what a consumer would see at the department store and what they would see at Syms. If something didn't sell, we'd have to find a price where it did sell. And that's why we always said the margin is in the buy. Because if we bought something, the price that we paid, if we could not sell it for a price where we made enough of a margin, that buyer wasn't good at what they were doing.
That is very true. So when you started in the business, or maybe even that is something that your dad did, But what do you think you guys saw about off-price retail that no one else saw at the time?
Well, any entrepreneur, and I've studied a lot of entrepreneurs, and I consider myself an entrepreneur, and no one just starts in a business from nothing. You have to have experience in that industry. You have to understand the dynamics. What we understood were the dynamics of the manufacturer's relationship to the department stores and where that was broken for the manufacturers. So just by getting 4 or 5 manufacturers to sell us these incredible bargain prices was enough to get into the business. And once they saw that we were able to pay them within 30 days, they wanted us to grow. My father's first store outside of New York and New Jersey was because Gant Shirt asked him to could you open more stores? They wanted a store for Gant shirts, summer shirts in Miami, and another one in Buffalo, New York, for large sizes. And it was because he was such a good partner. It was really a partnership with the vendor.
Yes, because it was helping vendors with their biggest problems. How do we sell what we create? And you guys were able to help them.
Yes, yes.
When you started, what were the most challenging parts of the business?
To me, it was so exciting, and I was very curious, and I love learning new things. To me, some of the most challenging things had to do with the people in the business and their assumptions about me, their assumptions about being a woman, their assumptions about being the daughter of the founder. And those things were challenging and took a while to figure out. One of the things that I think helped me a great deal were some of the organizations that I later became involved with, like the Committee of 200, which is an organization of women entrepreneurs, or the Women's Forum of New York, or even Young Presidents Organization, where I was able, although there weren't many women at the time, I was able to hear about the stresses of working in a family business and hear some of the solutions, meet some of the coaches, meet some of the consultants, understand that there were places you could go to find people who understood what you were going through. I also think you have to be pretty open to see mentors wherever they show up. I was taking night classes at the Fashion Institute of Technology to learn about domestics and textiles and the whole area of study that I had never known and I felt I needed to know to understand the cut, make, and trim. And the man who was teaching the course was accessible and kind enough to spend a little extra time with me and in a way become a mentor in the first early years of working. And if you don't take up those opportunities, it can be very challenging and lonely to be one of the few. But being an entrepreneur is lonely too, because you have to constantly reinforce your belief in your mission. You have to constantly reinforce your belief in your vision, even when things don't go right.
That is very true. So as you were scaling a retail chain across 16 states, that is a lot of work. Do you feel that there was a decision that was the most difficult decision you had to make during that period?
Well, it was many years. I mean, I was there for over 30, almost 35 years. And I think whenever there is a change in the business environment, as we saw in the 1990s when factory outlets for name brands took place, we know that like Tanger today is one of the largest managers of factory outlet malls, and they were a direct competitor to us. Whenever those kinds of things happen, and depending on what industry you're in, they happen much quicker than what I experienced, which was major change every like 7-8 years. It got faster the further along we got with the introduction of online buying. But the greatest challenges are, how do you respond to that change in the environment? How are you going to reimagine? What values do you hold on to? What tactics need to be changed? I believe that you always need to stick with the value of your proposition to your customer. That's non-negotiable. The value has to continue. And I don't mean just dollars and cents. One of the values that our customers always experience was respect. I mean, one of the things that was unique to the experience at Syms was the departments were always in the same place in the store. We did not move things around so that when you walked into the store that you were used to shopping in, you'd go, oh my goodness, where's the lingerie department? You know, we always kept it because we respected the time of the consumer. And we wanted to make sure that if you had 20 minutes to go in and out of the store, you'd find what you were looking for quickly. There were so many decisions that we made that the core principles having to do with respect and value were the reasons that we came up with those solutions whenever there was a disruption.
Such a critical insight that you guys realized, and then you had motivation, drive, consistency to actually stick to it.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there was something about what clients wanted that you initially didn't realize, but then you learned and you were surprised about?
You know, we didn't look at it that way. Although there were a couple of things that weren't core to the business, but they were definitely affecting the customer's experience. One was, we never accepted credit cards. It wasn't until almost 1998, we had been in business for almost 30 years before we were accepting credit cards. And this was something that fundamentally we felt that if you wanted this great deal, it should be cash and carry. But we also understood that in order for most people at a certain point to budget themselves, they were using credit cards. And the most convincing argument was that we were actually, with bad checks, we were actually losing as much money on bad checks as it would cost to pay for the 2% or whatever at that time to the credit card companies. So that was something, and our customers were thrilled that we finally accepted credit cards. Another thing that was, again, the consumer experience was about being open on Sundays. We weren't open on Sundays until the late 90s. So those were more operational things that had to do with our relationship to the customer. And the reason that I said that we didn't look at it that way is that we were not telling the customer how they should dress. We were telling the customer, this is a great deal. Most of the people who were Syms shoppers were people who had confidence in their taste. They had confidence in what they knew they looked good in. They had confidence to buy more than one if they found it in their size in another color. These were not consumers who needed to be cajoled or romanced into making a purchase. So our relationship was quite unique in that regard.
So interesting. And how did market segments that are your key market segments change over time? For example, now versus a few years ago versus 10, 20 years ago?
You know, there's been so much change. I mean, in the retail business, besides the factory outlets, remember the going vertical, we had those early on, Benetton, which was a European vertical company, but H&M now, and we had Express back in the 90s and the noughts. These were retailers that really made most consumers comfortable with disposable fashion. Now we're trying to educate people that disposable fashion is not great for the environment. That's for sure. You know, I try to promote resale shops now that I'm not in selling clothing myself. People ask me, well, where do you shop? I say, I go to resale shops. That's how I, feel like I'm making the right decision. It's quality and it's not the first user. But that changed our attitude towards brands, because you could go even to a Zara and you could have very fashion forward looking, but they wouldn't be expected to last more than 2 seasons, kind of at the most. You really didn't expect that you were making an investment. Most of the shopping at Syms was investment shopping. So with this change in attitude, this change in expectations was very much a fundamental change in the viability of an operation like Syms that was so loyal to not diluting the brands. See, Syms could never have been a TJ Maxx or a Marshalls because there wasn't enough product that was being legitimately manufactured with those designer names on them in order for there to be enough merchandise. Even when we went public, we told Wall Street, we don't imagine we'll ever have more than 50 stores because there's just not enough merchandise that's first run merchandise. What changed was the manufacturer's relationship with their own name, the economics of manufacturing, the fact that we went to 6 seasons of clothing, so constantly having new inventory, needing the pace of marking things down, the pace of the consumer expecting to see something different. It really, the whole economic structure has changed.
Marcy, and did you guys ever thought about creating your own clothing as well? Your own brand?
We did. It's a kind of fun story. We, early on in my joining Syms, we purchased a very elegant and well-known men's kind of carriage trade retailer where things were custom and bespoke. And the name was Sulka, Sulka. And we owned Sulka for almost a decade. We sold it eventually to Rochemont, who at the time owned Dunhill. But it was during that time, in understanding the make of more expensive, that we said, we could take some of this product, do it in natural fibers like cashmere and silk and 100% Oxford cotton. And we could perhaps do it in China. So in 1981, early on, we went to China. I was there with a couple of people from Syms, and we were able to provide for our customers incredible value for a time. But the customer did get confused. When we started having what we called the S label, the customer got confused because we were then saying, we're making choices about fashion for you. And we weren't doing that when we were just representing other designers. So we did that for about 20 years, and then it petered out.
So interesting. So you recently wrote a book. Was
Yes.
it difficult to select the topic because you would have so much you could have written about?
Well, you're right. I started out thinking that maybe there's something I could write about the not-for-profit world, running a foundation for as many years as I did. But honestly, it was during my talks with students at the Sy Syms School of Business and having those students not know who Sy was, or now that there aren't stores to visit to see what the business is, not understanding that we morphed into a real estate holding company traded on NASDAQ. And, but they didn't know the story of my father, Sy, whose vision it was to see that Yeshiva University had a business school. So that was the germ of it. And what was so fun about it, I found out things about my grandfather, who I never met, my father's father, who came from Russia, that my father didn't even know because no one really took the time to find these kinds of things. And I found out that he came to America at 14. And by the time he was 24, he had already gone bankrupt twice. He was such an entrepreneur and such a go-getter. It was terrific. And I tied this in the book, in the beginning of the book, because the book covers a great deal of decades, but I tied this into the spirit of entrepreneurship. And so much of the spirit of entrepreneurship has to do not only with survival at its very base, but this absolute thirst to be creative, a real thirst to create something.
Yes, that is the only way you can survive. You have to create a lot of value for people.
Yes.
And do it over time, consistently.
So the irony there is that you're impatient because you can see it as the entrepreneur. You see the way it's supposed to look, and then you have to explain it over and over and over again and never get tired of explaining it to everyone who comes in your path, who you want to be part of your team, or you want to be your customer, or you want to do business with. You have to explain it over and over and over again and never lose the passion.
Yes, especially with people who will tell you all the reasons why it is a silly idea, this is not going to work.
Yes, that's right. And there's nothing more satisfying than to, for instance, go back to a vendor, and when we did this over the years many times, that's how we got into the women's business. We said, look, we've been in the men's business for 20 years, and they haven't been hurt by us selling at these crazy prices. Try it. And that's how we got women's vendors to agree to sell us.
What is the hardest story you included in the book, and why did you decide to keep it?
The hardest story I told was about the what I call the beginning of the end, when we saw that our market share was dwindling, that we were not able to grow, in particular, our women's market. And a venerable name that we were quite familiar with, Filene's Basement, became available. And I and the board and my father, who was still alive at that time, thought that this would be a very good acquisition. It was affordable for us. We were able to actually purchase it with our bank revolver. We didn't have to go into debt, in extra debt, I should say. We did have to use the revolver. And it seemed that it was a perfect match in terms of markets and bringing that 30-year-old woman into the fold. And it was a very, very painful time for me. It was a period of time that I realized, not even 7 months after the purchase, that it was not exactly what it was supposed to be. And it was also a time that my father passed. And it was a time that I needed to focus more of my energies on the implementation and the integration of this new concept, where we had both of the stores together. The tag was, one good thing leads to another. Syms leads to Filene's, and Filene's leads to Syms. And we had terrific marketing and all that, but it was not the deal that it was presented as. Let's put it that way. The reason I included it in the book is that there's valuable lessons here for people in business, not just entrepreneurs, but anyone. Don't be the smaller one in a deal. You just don't want to be the smaller one if you're in a merger. And also, don't stay public if you no longer find yourself appreciated or understood or covered by the public markets. Neither of those situations ends well.
Those are such important insights. Thank you so much for sharing. Was there something you wanted to include but didn't?
I sort of wanted to include more about being a woman and some of the challenges that have to do with yourself internally, the self-examination, at the time, the scrutiny that you're put under in your physical appearance and your voice, your intonation. But I decided that was gratefully more something that was of the past and not so much right now. I don't think we're at all in a position where women are treated equally or even fairly. And that has to do with my fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment and having, if you're not in the founding document of a country, how can you feel respected by that country? It's something that since leaving corporate America, I've worked very, very diligently on.
That is a very important issue. Thank you so much for working on that.
Thank you.
What leadership advice in your book you think people will disagree with? Not everyone, but many you think will disagree, and why you think they should still give it some serious thought?
Yeah, I think from the overall message of the book, which is about the foundational aspect of respect, which has to do with transparency, it has to do with availability, it has to do with clarity, it has to do with commitment, it has to do with communications. Some people might see that as something that comes from the top and can be forced down. But respect really, once a founder or leader lays it out, it can only come from the bottom. It can only come from those people dealing with how the money is made every day. It can only come with those who are engaging in a way that informs them about how the company is perceived. What are the successes of the company? So I think that there might be some disagreement about what they call the servant leadership, which I think is not the greatest, title for it. It's really about a leader who respects everyone else who's part of the team and listens and adapts because of what they're learning and what they hear. And even those people who feel that for some reason they can't explain what they're doing, look at yourself as a leader. The problem is therefore with you if you can't explain why and what you're doing and why it's good for everybody.
Do you feel that many people do not understand certain things about having influence within the organization, and how could they grasp it?
What do you mean by influence?
Well, I don't like word power as much, because it can have some negative associations, but often within an organization, you have to get things done.
Yes.
Always. And so do you feel that people misunderstand something about having power?
Nothing gets done without influence. Nothing gets done without persuasion. But persuasion has to be done in a respectful way. Persuasion is not coercion. Coercion is, we have 30 days to get this done. One way or another, you better get it done. That's a little bit like blackmail. There's nothing sticky about that. It's very transactional. Get it done in 30 days, and that's that. Influence takes time. It takes energy. But influence sticks. I'll give you an example as a member of the board, as a board, an outside board, not even the Syms board. But in times of stress, when you as a board have to make very difficult decisions, and there might be, for instance, an activist shareholder who comes and wants to depose the CEO or wants to have seats on the board. And as a board, you're not going to be able to get to the best solutions in time of stress unless you actually pick up on those people and the relationship you have with them. When someone's kid gets into a school, or someone else's mother is in the hospital or something, those human contacts, how's your mom doing? Oh, does your kid like the school? Oh, I know someone there. They want interest in the photography club. I know someone in photography. That's how influence happens. Influence is something you have to have building blocks for. And it's something that stands the test of time because it takes an investment. But you get the best outcomes when you have spheres of influence that you can tap into.
Yes, people get motivated by much more than just compensation and so on. There's loyalty.
Right. Well, we know that right now in the American workforce, about a third of employees are suffering what they call quiet cracking. That means that they are already checking out while they're getting a paycheck. They're either not fully engaged, looking for something else to do, or even bad-mouthing their company where they work. And why does this happen? It happens because the company is really, in my opinion, not taking the opportunity to engage people in a respectful way. They have to be heard. They have to be valued. They have to be seen. They have to be part of the process of being influential. Don't you want all the people that represent your company to feel influential? How powerful is that?
It is incredibly powerful and very important. Marcy, if you would run this company today again, what would you do differently?
Well, in retrospect, I would not have gone public. I think that we were very seduced by the idea, my father particularly, and I understood. He worked hard and long and made a lot of sacrifices, but he wanted to take some chips off the table. He wanted to start living a little larger. And going public certainly made that possible. He became a very wealthy man, and he had a sizable foundation. But the trade-off, if you're in a family business, is in a sense losing control. You lose your destiny. You lose your relationship with your destiny. You lose the relationship with the decisions that you make to fulfill what your vision was. So in my dealings with family businesses and as a consultant, I've always say, only go to the public markets as an exit strategy. It is not a growth strategy. So that fundamentally, I would have done that differently.
I agree with you. I think even having investors, also not ideal.
Not ideal at all.
I want to ask you something about mindset. Mindset is such an important part of success.
Yes.
Maybe 80% of success.
Yeah.
What do you feel is different about how you think versus how you see many other people think? People who are less successful by your definition of success.
I'm not sure that there is a real appreciation for the work ethic. I know that sounds very simplified, but it means you have to do and work for as long as it takes to get it done to the standard that you're trying to reach. It's not just checking the box. A work work ethic involves aspirational goals about getting something done in a certain way. And I think that that's underestimated. Sometimes people are called the ever-ready battery. They're always ready to go and do. But are you always ready to go and do with the focus that you're going to accomplish a particular goal in a particular way? And I think successful people have that in mind and use that work ethic in that way, not just to be the ever-ready battery and always be on the go and always be doing something, but they're very focused and there's a constant striving for improvement.
And are there some key things about your mindset that shifted over time that you feel comfortable sharing?
I think in many ways, over time, I appreciated more the things that I observed in my father and those entrepreneurs from his generation, where they were just saw the possibilities. They never contemplated defeat. It wasn't in the cards, as they would say. Defeat was not a possibility, and it really made it not only fun for them, but it also made it fun for people who worked with them. I mean, there's not too much success around pessimists. I don't think pessimists build companies. You have to be an optimist. You have to believe. And if you don't make it one way, you'll make it another way. I think that I appreciate more today than I did before. Something that I miss a little bit is having the aspects of integrity and what that implies. Integrity of character, integrity of purpose is something that never goes out of style. But I do think we have to remind ourselves that it's not easy. Integrity is something that gets tested, and it's difficult. It's not supposed to be easy. And that's why it's not so common.
That is very true. And it is so valuable to have people in your life, in business and personal life, people who have integrity.
Yes. And you really, at the foundation, with respect and integrity comes trust. And without trust, we often hear about trust in marriage and how one infidelity can break a marriage and all that. Well, it's not so different in business, not so different at all. With all relationships, and all business is relationships.
That is very true. I also want to ask you about AI and technology. So as AI and other tech advancements really changing everything for us very fast, what do you think leaders need to do now to remain competitive?
Well, I believe first and foremost, they have to look inward. I know there's an awful lot to keep up with right now, but they really have to look inward. And how is their workforce, first and foremost, going to have to change their skills? And what is their workforce going to look like with AI? And then you can see what it means to your customer. But first, to protect your own business proposition, you have to understand, will you be needing to lose the first tier of employees in your business? I mean, we've heard about this for law firms, accounting firms, that the first level folks are going to be wiped out, and what's going to happen to all those jobs. Well, the leaders in those areas, they first and foremost, they need to be thinking about this. They need to be making plans now. They need to be trying things out now. We can't wait for 2 years from now, and you're all of a sudden up, you're on a cliff because your competitor has wiped out a good section of cost. And then what do you do for those people who need to be retrained? How are they going to find other employment? These are really decisions and considerations that business leaders need to be part of. We as business leaders need to be in on how is this going to be handled? What is it going to look like? How is it going to be regulated? And how do we know when there's a need for a pullback?
Do you feel there is maybe one long-term risk that you see few people preparing for, specifically leaders, but they should?
There's more than one long-term risk that leaders should be preparing for. I think the geopolitical destabilization is something that often doesn't get dealt with because we're concerned about taking sides. But the universe of geopolitical disruption is something that's not just for insurance companies, and it's not just about the environment. It's about our futures. And that is whether it's scenario building or offsites to role play and maybe bring in some outside thinkers to create scenarios that are bizarre. It reminds me of an Eisenhower. He had some very wise expressions, and one was about planning, and he said, plans are dispensable, but planning is indispensable. And the amount of planning that today's leaders really need to do, along with their boards and their C-suite and their management, all need to understand the very strong currents of geopolitical moves and changes.
Since you mentioned there are many, maybe you could share one more risk people should really pay attention to.
Well, if things continue as they are, the risk for an American company is to learn how the world feels without being the world currency. What does that look like? We've had it now for a long time in America. We've built our belief structures and our expectations solidly around that assumption. I think that should be part of the role playing. That should be part of the risk scenarios that are looked at. And what does that look like?
Last question, my favorite question. Over the last few years, or even maybe your entire life so far, what were maybe 2, 3 aha moments, realizations that really changed the way you look at life or the way you look at business?
Well, the first one happened when I was 11, when I became a feminist. And it was my mother, who was pregnant for the 6th time and had experienced 2 postpartum depressions, wanted to have her tubes tied. And in order to do that, as a grown woman with 5 healthy children and one in her body about to find life, she had to get 3 doctors to sign off on this. She also had to get her husband to sign off on this. And that changed my feeling about being a woman forever. That made me a feminist at 11, and I've never looked back at that. Another epiphanal change in my life was when I was a teenager, before senior year, and I was diagnosed with a difficult disease. And there's nothing that makes you value every day and every breath more than being told it might be the end. So I do recommend that kind of an insight, you shouldn't wait till you're confronted with something that threatens you with this is your last day or this is your last breath. It's more than trite, but it is worth contemplating that you might not wake up tomorrow morning. You just might. It doesn't matter what age you are. Listen, I lost a sister at 37. She died of a heart attack. And you don't know when it's going to, and that's why every day is so precious. So that's, to my mind, that's a good argument for being filled with integrity and good deeds.
Marcy, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. Where can our listeners learn more about you, buy your book, anything you want to share?
Well, I've learned, because the last book I published was 1992, before Amazon, I learned that it makes a big difference to order the book before the launch date. And Leading with Respect is launching on August 26th. That's the Day of the Woman. And if you could please write a review once you read it. And like my grandmother used to tell me, if you don't have something nice to say, please don't say anything at all.
That is a very, very important advice from your grandma. I agree 100% because it's for anyone, including authors who put in their heart and soul into the work, and they're not really making anything from the books. The royalties are so small. Yeah. So getting those negative reviews is just really heartbreaking.
Yeah. It is. It is. It comes from someone who probably has no other outlet for their negativity. So we don't want to do that. And if you want to know more about, you could go to the marcysyms.com or the Sy Syms Foundation.com.
Marcy, thank you so much for being here.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Our guest today was Marcy Syms. Check out her book. It's called Leading with Respect: Adventures of an Off-Price Fashion Pioneer. This episode is brought to you by strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. You can get it at firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. You can also get McKinsey and BCG winning resume example, which is a resume that got offers from both of those firms. And you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. And lastly, you can get 9 Leaders in Action, one of our books, which is actually co-written with some of the listeners of the podcast and some of our clients. And you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/gift. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I'm looking forward to connect with you all next time.